Welcome to today's deep dive. I'm so glad you're joining us because we have a topic today that perfectly intersects data science, pharmacology, and human biology.
It really does. It's a fascinating cross-section.
Right. And our mission today is to unpack a massive new study that explores the hidden links between certain very common medications and male infertility risks.
And we are talking about a giant stack of data here.
Yeah, specifically, comprehensive reviews of the largest medication safety databases in the United States and Europe. We are extracting exactly what you need to know about what might literally be sitting in your medicine cabinet right now.
It is a phenomenal piece of research, honestly, primarily because of the sheer volume of the data tables. We're looking at vast repositories like the FDA Adverse Event Reporting System and its European equivalents.
Right.
The researchers essentially deployed this massive data mining operation across these systems to isolate statistical signals where specific drugs correlated heavily with reports of male fertility problems.
And to be clear on the methodology here, they weren't looking at controlled clinical trials.
No, not at all.
They were analyzing post-market surveillance. Can you break down the mechanics of these databases for the listener? Like, how exactly is this real-world data populated?
Yeah, so it relies entirely on spontaneous reporting systems. These databases are populated by voluntary reports submitted by healthcare providers and, in some cases, the patients themselves.
Okay.
The scenario usually looks like this. A patient is prescribed a medication, and months or even years later, they or their physician notice a secondary health issue developing.
Which in this case would be altered semen parameters or clinical infertility.
Exactly. So they submit a detailed report to the national database outlining the adverse event and the suspected pharmacological trigger. It's epidemiology in action.
Real-world tracking.
Right. Designed to track long-term outcomes once a drug leaves that highly controlled environment of phase 3 clinical trials and actually enters the general population.
Which means we are looking at millions of data points across a wildly diverse patient demographic. And as I was reviewing the source material, what immediately stood out to me was the pharmacological variety.
Oh, it's huge.
We aren't just looking at highly specialized niche endocrine disruptors here. The list spans from topical hair loss solutions to standard antidepressants. I mean, things people take every single day.
And that variety is precisely what makes the findings so clinically relevant. The data mining doesn't discriminate based on a drug's mechanism of action. It just tracks the reported outcomes.
Right?
And when the researchers applied their statistical thresholds to this ocean of voluntary reports, they managed to isolate a remarkably specific set of signals.
Okay, let's unpack this. Out of the thousands of approved therapeutics on the market, the researchers identified exactly 19 medications that appeared with statistically significant frequency in cases involving male infertility or sperm-related problems.
Exactly 19. And to truly understand the implications here, we need to analyze these medications not just as a random list, but by their drug classes.
Categorize them.
Right. We can categorize these 19 distinct drugs based on their primary clinical applications. It reveals a lot about how different systemic interventions might inadvertently cascade into the reproductive axis.
I want to go through these categories thoroughly so you, listening, can cross-reference this with your own knowledge base or personal regimen. Let's start with the dermatological and cosmetic side.
Sure.
The study isolated two very common hair loss medications, finasteride and minoxidil. Now, I understand finasteride, given its mechanism, but minoxidil is largely a topical vasodilator. How are these manifesting in the data?
Well, finasteride makes biological sense right out of the gate because it's a 5-alpha reductase inhibitor.
Right.
It works by blocking the conversion of testosterone into dihydrotestosterone, or DHT.
Which causes hair loss.
Right. DHT is a primary driver of male pattern baldness, but it is also crucial for epididymal function and seminal vesicle fluid production. Altering that hormonal balance systemically to treat a localized issue on the scalp can naturally have downstream reproductive effects.
Makes sense. And minoxidil.
Minoxidil, while a vasodilator primarily used topically, still enters systemic circulation. The hypothesis there revolves around potential alterations to the microvasculature of the testes.
Ah, the blood flow.
Exactly. Though the exact mechanism is less definitively mapped than finasteride's enzymatic blockade.
That makes the transition to the next category quite logical, which involves prostate medications. The data highlighted dutasteride and tamsulosin. Dutasteride is also a 5-alpha reductase inhibitor, similar to finasteride but often more potent, right?
Correct. Dutasteride inhibits both type 1 and type 2 isoenzymes, leading to a much more profound suppression of serum DHT. So the mechanism of reproductive interference is largely the same as finasteride, just amplified.
And tamsulosin.
Tamsulosin operates differently. It's an alpha-1 adrenergic receptor antagonist used to relax smooth muscle in the prostate and bladder neck. Its appearance in the data is deeply interesting because alpha blockers are notorious for causing retrograde ejaculation,
Oh, wow.
or even anejaculation. So the infertility reported in the database might be more mechanical.
The physical transport of the sperm.
Exactly, rather than a disruption of the sperm production itself.
That distinction between mechanical failure and production failure is a great point. Moving deeper into the endocrine system, the next category is direct hormone-related therapies. The databases showed strong signals for testosterone, medroxyprogesterone, and chorionic gonadotrophin.
This is a classic example of the HPG axis, the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis, functioning exactly as it's designed to, albeit with unintended clinical consequences.
Right, because of the external hormones.
Yes. When a patient introduces exogenous testosterone into their system, the brain detects the elevated androgen levels and signals the hypothalamus and pituitary gland to halt the production of gonadotropin-releasing hormone, luteinizing hormone, and follicle-stimulating hormone.
It's a negative feedback loop. The brain thinks the tests are overproducing, so it just shuts down the localized signal entirely.
Precisely. Without those hormones stimulating the testes, intratesticular testosterone levels plummet, and spermatogenesis essentially grinds to a halt. It is pharmacologically induced hypogonadism.
And the other two?
Chorionic gonadotropin and medroxyprogesterone can similarly disrupt this delicate feedback loop, altering the precise hormonal environment required for germ cell maturation.
And the researchers also identified a related category of hormone-suppressing drugs, specifically those used in prostate cancer protocols: leuprorelin and triptorelin.
Yes, these are gonadotropin-releasing hormone agonists. Chronic administration ultimately downregulates the receptors in the pituitary gland. This creates a profound, sustained suppression of testicular androgen production.
It's medical castration.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
Which is the intended therapeutic goal for prostate cancer, but naturally results in a total cessation of sperm production.
I want to pivot here because those first few categories all have obvious direct links to the endocrine system or the urogenital tract. But the list ventures into entirely different systemic territories.
It really does.
The data showed a high frequency of reports linked to selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, specifically the antidepressants citalopram and paroxetine. How exactly is a drug designed to alter neurotransmitters in the brain showing up in a fertility database?
It is a fantastic question, and it highlights how ubiquitous certain receptors are in the human body. Serotonin isn't just confined to the brain. Serotonergic receptors are present throughout the male reproductive tract.
That is fascinating.
Right. SSRIs like citalopram and paroxetine can delay epididymal transit time. Paradoxically, that can lead to increased DNA fragmentation in the sperm due to prolonged exposure to reactive oxygen species.
Because they're just sitting there longer.
Exactly. Additionally, these medications can mildly elevate prolactin levels, which in turn can exert a suppressive effect on the HPG axis we discussed earlier.
That is a brilliant illustration of systemic interconnectedness. What about the seizure medications isolated by the study? The data points to carbamazepine and valproic acid. Are we looking at a similar neuroendocrine disruption?
With anticonvulsants like carbamazepine and valproic acid, the literature suggests a multifactorial impact. They are known to alter the circulating levels of sex hormone-binding globulin,
which dictates how much free testosterone is active in the blood.
Exactly. There is also evidence pointing toward direct cytotoxic effects on the testicular tissue itself, altering both sperm morphology and motility.
Okay, moving down the list, the researchers also found a strong correlation with sulfasalazine, which is a common anti-inflammatory often deployed for autoimmune conditions like rheumatoid arthritis or ulcerative colitis.
Sulfasalazine is actually one of the older, more well-documented pharmacological culprits in this space. It's known to induce a reversible oligospermia.
A severe drop in sperm count.
Right. The mechanism is believed to involve interference with folate metabolism, which is absolutely critical for DNA synthesis in rapidly dividing cells like developing sperm. It also induces localized oxidative stress,
which provides a seamless transition to the final and undoubtedly most intense category: chemotherapy drugs. The researchers identified 5 specific chemotherapeutic agents in the safety databases: bleomycin, vinblastine, etoposide, doxorubicin, and hydroxycarbamide.
Chemotherapy agents are explicitly designed to target and destroy rapidly dividing cells because spermatogonia, Those stem cells that eventually become mature sperm are among the most rapidly dividing cells in the human body. They're incredibly susceptible to cytotoxic agents.
They just get caught in the crossfire.
Exactly. Drugs like doxorubicin and etoposide induce DNA cross-linking or strand breaks. Depending on the cumulative dose, this gonadotoxicity can lead to long-term or even permanent azoospermia.
To contextualize this massive spectrum of medications for you listening, think about the human body like a complex IT infrastructure. On one end, you have routine, low-level background scripts running daily, things like your topical hair loss routines or daily antidepressants.
Right.
In the middle, you have core operating system updates that rewrite how the hardware talks to the software. That's your exogenous hormones and 5 alpha reductase inhibitors. And on the far end, you have severe system-wide virus purges, your chemotherapies.
That is an incredibly apt way to frame the pharmacology.
Thanks. The fascinating takeaway from this study is that whether you are running a minor background script or formatting the entire hard drive, you can still inadvertently sever the system's connection to the Wi-Fi. The systemic impacts cross the entire spectrum of therapeutic intensity.
It perfectly highlights why analyzing massive, diverse data sets is so crucial. It detects the anomalies and system failures across entirely different medical disciplines, from dermatology and psychiatry to oncology and rheumatology.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The 19 drugs are just the what. The researchers also uncovered an incredible pattern regarding the when. As they parsed the temporal data in these thousands of reports, they noticed a highly specific timeline.
The 4-month mark.
Yes. A vast majority of these fertility-related adverse events were reported almost exactly 4 months after the patient initiated the medication.
What's fascinating here is how beautifully that 4-month database latency aligns with the fundamental biology of spermatogenesis. This is not a statistical artifact, it is a physiological echo.
Break that down for us.
The biological process of creating a fully mature spermatozoon from an initial germ cell takes approximately 74 days.
So we're talking about roughly 2.5 months just for the cellular assembly line.
Exactly. But the process doesn't end there. Once the sperm are formed in the testes, they must travel through the epididymis for maturation and storage, which takes additional time. When you combine the 74-day production cycle with the necessary transit and maturation time, the entire physiological loop takes roughly 3 to 4 months.
So we are essentially looking at a delayed signal in the data. If a patient starts taking paroxetine or finasteride today, and that drug begins interfering with the cells at the very beginning of the assembly line, the patient wouldn't instantly see a drop in their clinical parameters.
Right, because the mature sperm already stored in the system are completely unaffected.
Precisely. The drug exerts its disruptive effect on the newly developing batch of cells. You won't clinically detect that pharmacological interference until that specific disrupted cohort of cells completes its maturation cycle and is eventually evaluated.
And because human biology dictates that this cycle takes about 4 months, the database reports organically spike at that exact temporal marker.
The fact that the adverse event reporting aligns so perfectly with the physiological reality of the male reproductive cycle is just a stunning validation of the data mining process. It elevates these findings from a mere statistical correlation to a timeline that implies a clear mechanistic interference.
It really does. However, as compelling as this biological timeline is, we have to look at how we interpret epidemiological data of this nature.
Right, the caveats.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we absolutely must engage in a rigorous assessment of what spontaneous reporting databases can and cannot prove. This is fundamental to epidemiological literacy. Because these databases rely on voluntary reporting, we are looking at a self-selecting data set.
Meaning we only see the problems that got reported.
Yes. The study establishes a strong statistical correlation, but correlation, as we know, does not inherently equal causation.
Right, because we are missing the denominator. We have the reports of the men who took the drug and experienced the adverse event, but we don't have the controlled data on the tens of thousands of men who took the exact same drug and experienced 0 reproductive issues.
Exactly. Furthermore, we have to account for a massive epidemiological variable known as confounding by indication.
What does that mean in this context?
It means we must ask, is the adverse event caused by the pharmacological intervention? Or is it caused by the underlying pathology the drug was prescribed to treat? Take sulfasalazine, for example.
The anti-inflammatory.
Right. We know it impacts folate metabolism.
Yeah.
But sulfasalazine is prescribed for severe autoimmune diseases. Systemic inflammation and highly elevated immune responses are incredibly detrimental to sperm production on their own.
Ah, I see.
So teasing out whether the infertility is a result of the drug or the severe rheumatoid arthritis necessitating the drug is incredibly difficult in a purely observational data set.
That makes a lot of sense from a data analytics perspective. To translate that caveat into how you should view this study, think of this post-market surveillance data like an anomaly detection algorithm in a massive server network.
That's a good way to put it.
The algorithm isolates a strong signal and points you directly to a specific log file that requires a manual audit. It tells you exactly where to look. In this case, these 19 specific medications. But the algorithm itself does not provide the root cause analysis of why the server crashed. It is the starting point for targeted clinical investigation, not the absolute medical verdict.
That is the precise analytical framework to use here. The researchers have successfully identified 19 distinct pharmacological signals that warrant heightened clinical scrutiny and further double-blind, placebo-controlled investigation. It is a critical early warning system.
So what does this all mean? We've analyzed a massive data mining operation across U.S. and European pharmacovigilance databases. We've examined the mechanisms of 19 specific drugs, from the 5-alpha reductase inhibition of finasteride to the cytotoxic effects of doxorubicin.
We covered a lot of ground.
We did. We mapped the brilliant 4-month temporal correlation against the human spermatogenesis cycle, and we rigorously established the boundaries of observational data. If you are navigating these issues right now, what is the actionable takeaway from this research?
The clinical utility of this data is proactive medication management. If you are actively trying to conceive or planning to enter a localized fertility window, you need to conduct a comprehensive audit of your current pharmacological regimen with your physician.
And that includes everything.
Everything, from topical cosmetics to psychiatric management. But, and this is crucial, never abruptly discontinue a prescribed medication, as the rebound effects of the underlying pathology can be far more severe. Instead, use this data to initiate an informed dialogue about potential alternatives or dosage adjustments during your conception window.
Absolutely. Knowledge empowers you to ask the right questions. And if you're dealing with male factor issues and you're looking for a natural approach to improving sperm quality in New York City, you can visit the Berkeley Center at www.berkeleycenter.com. Navigating the intersection of systemic health and reproductive function often requires specialized integrative protocols.
It does. Managing systemic health while optimizing reproductive parameters is an incredibly delicate balancing act, and specialized guidance is invaluable.
We have tracked data from massive international repositories all the way down to the cellular timeline of human biology today. But before we wrap up, I think there is one more critical extrapolation we can make from the data.
Yes. This raises an important question, one that seamlessly builds on the spermatogenesis timeline we mapped out earlier.
Oh, heck.
If it takes roughly 4 months for the disruptive effects of a newly introduced medication to manifest clinically due to the biological production cycle, does the inverse also hold true?
Oh, that is a fascinating thought.
Right. If a patient, under medical supervision, ceases the use of a problematic drug like sulfasalazine or citalopram, does the data imply that it would take a minimum of 4 full months for the localized cellular environment to clear and for a completely new, unhindered cycle of fertility to potentially reset and recover?
That is an incredibly potent thought to end on. It highlights that biological recovery, much like pharmacological disruption, is bound by its own strict, unyielding timeline. Patience and physiological awareness are just as important as the interventions themselves. Thank you so much for joining us for today's deep dive. Until next time, keep analyzing the data and stay curious.